I mean, if you know the story, then I'll still repeat it. I moved to Vienna in 2015. I moved with an IT company. I freaked out because I had to file my US taxes. And then I asked for help, and I was led to essentially a firm that wanted to charge me $2,000 to file my taxes, which were not very complicated at that point. And that's when I said, all right, it is my mission to make this simpler and to create an actual tax software that is for US expats, because everything that was on the market in 2015 was for Americans living in America, and just trying to put in your foreign income was, I mean, you'd rather just pull out your hair at that point. So that's how MyExpatTaxes came to be. And what we'll talk about today is really everything about child tax credits, right? So the child tax credit, child independent care credits, we're going to get really deep into that topic. If you have a child, what to do, how to get a social security number, are you eligible for these credits? And then further on, how do you claim your child as dependent, right? Does using the foreign earned income exclusion, because I think almost every expat probably knows that word, does that help you or does that hurt you on your return? And if you have a child, what does your child need to report? When do they have to start filing their own taxes, their own FBAR, right? And all of that good stuff. So we're going to get real deep into these topics, and I hope you enjoy that. And of course, as you go through and you think about your US taxes, look no further than MyExpatTaxes. We've been around. We are the market leader in US expat taxes for tax filing softwares. And it's because we really try to make it as simple as possible to file. And also, if you think you're too complex for a do-it-yourself tax software, I mean, we have tax professionals that you can just easily talk to. You can make sure that your complex situation is heard, and you'd be surprised what we can do and churn out. So go ahead and check us out. Otherwise, let's continue on. So what everyone is here for, the child tax credits. What is the child tax credit? The child tax credit is a credit that you can take on your US tax return if you have a qualifying child. Now, the first part of that is essentially, what is this credit? Because it's a little confusing, because you hear the child tax credit, you hear about the additional child tax credit, now you're hearing about the refundable child tax credit. Well, I'm here to tell you it's all one thing. This whole bucket is just the child tax credit, and essentially it's made of two layers. The first layer is a non-refundable credit, meaning that it's there to lower your US tax bill. And then the second layer, which is most of the time a smaller chunk of the child tax credit, that's the refundable portion. So if you don't use the entire child tax credit amount, right, and you have some left over after you've lowered your US tax bill to zero, a certain level of that child tax credit is refundable. And again, in previous years, it's been called the additional child tax credit. No, you don't need an additional child to get the refund. It's just the refundable part of that credit. And I guess the IRS caught wind of how confusing that sounds, because this year they changed it to be called the refundable child tax credit, but it's all the same. So how much are these credits? Well, between 2018 and 2020, the refundable amount per qualifying dependents under the age of 17. So again, key is under age of 17 here. The non-refundable part was $2,000. And if you didn't use the entire child tax credit, you could get a refundable amount of up to $1,400 per qualifying child under 17. Now in 2021, that changed a bit. So the first major change is it's for qualifying children under the age of 18, right? That is a big difference. So again, when you think about calculating the age, it is how old are they on December 31st of that tax year. So for 2021's tax return, how old was your child on December 31st, 2021? Were they under 18 or were they 18 and over? If they're under 18, they may be eligible for this child tax credit. So the non-refundable layer is $3,000 to $3,600, and I'll get a little bit more into those different amounts. But essentially, that is the non-refundable portion for everyone. Now, the refundable portion for 2021, for the majority of expats, it's still only $1,400. And I'll get into that, where some expats might actually get the $3,000 to $3,600 as a refund. But for the majority of expats who have lived abroad for the entire year, you can expect the same $1,400. And I know in comparison to $3,000, it sounds disappointing, but it's still $1,400 that you may get as a refund on your tax return. So it's not too bad. Now, let's go into the child tax credit and what makes you as a taxpayer eligible for the credit. So the first thing is looking at you and your income profile. So what you do need is more than $2,500 of earned income. So earned income normally includes worldwide wages. So if you have salaried income, that would be included, US self-employment income, and foreign self-employment income if it's not exempt from self-employment tax. Now, I will call that out that most firms can allow you to claim the child tax credit, the refundable child tax credit, if you have foreign self-employment income that is exempt from self-employment tax. But as the IRS continues to fine-tune their rules, and this is an ongoing evolution of making all of these kind of gray area rules where it's not really perfectly defined for expats in our situation, the IRS is going through that, and they are combing through those rules and making it more and more clear every year. Okay, what can you as an expat claim versus someone that's in America, living in America? So again, earned income would be normally worldwide wages, self-employment income that is subject to US self-employment tax. So that is kind of the big thing. And self-employment tax is higher than the refunds from the refundable child tax credit for the most part, because self-employment tax is about 15.3%, whereas the refundable child tax credit is normally 15%. So just an FYI, if you have self-employment income and you're thinking about whether you should use the totalization treaty to exempt yourself from self-employment tax, or you should forgo the totalization treaty in order to claim the additional child tax credit, well, most likely you're going to end up with a tax bill. But I will say that if you pay self-employment tax, it is not all law. So again, this is not really relevant for today's conversation, but just so you're aware, if you are self-employed and you're thinking about whether or not you should claim the totalization treaty, if you do subject your foreign self-employment income to US self-employment tax, you will then ultimately contribute to your Social Security benefits account. So in order to claim Social Security benefits from the US at a later point in time, you do need about 40 credits. And essentially, if you pay self-employment tax, even if you're abroad, you can add to the amount of credits you have every single year. So that is just something to consider. But again, kind of out of scope for this presentation. Of course, feel free to ask more questions about that in the questions box, but just a heads up there. And then another thing to be aware of is obviously the pandemic happened. And for a lot of us, that impacted our jobs, and probably in a negative way. So if you earned less during the pandemic in 2020, 2021, it's okay. The IRS actually allows you to claim your 2019 earned income on your 2020 and your 2021 tax return. So again, if you had earned more money in 2019 and that amount of money you earned in 2019 would have made you eligible for the refundable child tax credit, so you can use that 2019 amount instead of what you actually earned in 2020 or 2021 on your tax returns. But it's only for 2019. So it's not that you can use your 2020 earned income for your 2021 tax return. It's you can only use your 2019 earned income instead of your 2020 or 2021 earned income on those relevant returns. I'm sure that's a bit of a mouthful, but just an FYI, so you know. Now, that's kind of the minimum income requirement. Now, there's also a maximum adjusted gross income threshold. So essentially, you'll see it on the screen right there. But if you're married filing jointly, it's $400,000 US dollars for your adjusted gross income, and all other filing status is half of that. So if your adjusted gross income comes to over that amount, then any refund you get from the child tax credit would be lowered, possibly down to zero. So again, there are income requirements for the child tax credit, the refundable portion at least, and it's a minimum income requirement and a maximum income threshold. And so just so you kind of understand how the refundable part of the child tax credit works, the general calculation is you take your earned income, you minus 2,500. So that's why I say you need more than 2,500. And whatever is left over is times 15%. And so basically you can claim up to 1,400 US dollars per child as a refundable child tax credit. So I hope that makes it a little bit more clear, because again, if you were claiming the refundable child tax credits, you probably had Schedule 8812 in your tax return. And I'm sure if you look at the form, it's not very clear what's happening. So this is what is happening on that form. Now, that's what your requirements were as a taxpayer in terms of income. Now, what about your children's? Can you actually even claim your child as a dependent on your tax return for the purposes of the child tax credit? Well, we have to first look at, can you claim your child as a dependent? So there's a couple different questions to ask to figure out if you can claim your child as dependent. And we do ask all those questions on MyExpatTaxes. So, this is just kind of the general ones, but obviously there are a little bit more. So definitely go to MyExpatTaxes and, even if you don't pay at the end, you can just see through the flow, can you claim your child? So the main requirements would be is they have to live with you for more than half the year. Now, because it's tax, there's always exceptions. If your child was away for a temporary reason, so temporary absence, so say they were at school or on vacation or et cetera, but normally they would be residing with you, then that still counts as living with you for more than half the year. So just because they're away at university or a boarding school or something like that, it doesn't mean that you cannot claim them as a dependent. Now, the other part is they can't pay for more than half of their own financial support. So essentially making sure that you and your spouse, even if you're not filing with your spouse or your partner or whoever, essentially you're providing their financial support and they're not really standing on their own 2 feet, right? They're still depending on you. Now, the next big requirement, which can be tough for those that have children abroad, is does your child have a valid US Social Security number by the due date of your tax return? So let's break it down. The first part is by the due date of your tax return. Each tax year for expats is normally due June 15th of the following year, but you can extend that, right? So you can extend that up to October 15th if you file an extension 4868 by June 15th. So that gets you an extension till October 15th. And then before October 15th, you can then write a letter to the IRS to ask for an extension until December 15th. And that's really key because if you don't have a US Social Security number yet for your child, it gives you time to get one because it's about a 3-month processing time, if you're lucky, to get a US Social Security number abroad these days. And I know this because I went through this process last year, but it does happen. And I'm sure if you've been trying it, you've probably been frustrated, but I promise you it does happen. It just takes some time, but we'll get into kind of those details later. Now, another thing I hear a lot of the time is a lot of parents going, I don't want to get a US Social Security number for my child because I don't want them to have to be subject to US tax reporting later. I am so sorry to burst your bubble, but if you gave your child US citizenship, they are subject. It's not a Social Security number, it's their citizenship. But I can also tell you that if you give them US citizenship, and then you don't get them a US Social Security number, you're probably going to make their life a lot harder later on because one day they're going to realize they have to file a US tax return, they have to file their FBARs, but they don't have a Social Security number. And as an adult, it's a lot harder and a lot more time consuming to get a Social Security number than if you're a child. If you're a child, you can virtually do a lot of that via mail versus having to go in person to get all that stuff done as an adult. So just an FYI, if you're giving your children US citizenship, you might as well at the same time get them a US Social Security number because 1, you can get a refund on your tax returns, and 2, you save them time later on when they realize they have to also go through this process. Now, the next part is your child under the age threshold? So to claim a child on a US tax return, you can actually claim them up to age 24 if they're a full-time student. But this is different for the child tax credit. There is a lower age threshold. So for the child tax credit, that is under 17 for years 2018 to 2020 and under 18 for year 2021. Now, like I said, because Social Security numbers are probably one of the tough parts in this, it is relatively straightforward to get a Social Security number. Not that it's easy, but it's relatively straightforward. So what you'll have to do is obviously at the same time you're getting them US citizenship, it's all pretty much related. You would go through the process of first getting them US citizenship and getting them a US passport, right? So you're going to have to go ahead and register the birth abroad. You're going to get the CRBA. At that point, you're going to go ahead and get their passport, right? Then you get their passport. Once you get their passport, you're basically going to get, certified copies of all of these documents mailed to you. And then at that point, you would go ahead and, depending on where you submit the paperwork, because it is different in every country and depending on the local consulate or embassy, most of the time it's going to be the nearest federal benefits unit closest to you. What you'll do is you'll have the Social Security number application. You'll have all the certified copies. You put it all in a big envelope. You send it off, or you go in person. And then 3 to 6 months later, this also includes the passport waiting time, right? You will get a Social Security number card in your mail. I promise you, it does happen. I did it in the height of the pandemic when everything was closed. It still does get processed, but yes, it is a slow process, so plan accordingly. We do offer filing extensions through MyExpatTaxes. We're going to open that up in about 1 or 2 weeks. So just make sure you're signed up. And right when we open that up, we're going to make it so easy to file a filing extension so that you can go ahead and just have that peace of mind until October 15th. And if at October 15th, around October, you don't think you'll get the Social Security number, remember, you can still extend until December 15th. Alrighty. So that was the child tax credit. A lot of information. I will quickly just go over the child and dependent care credit. This isn't so relevant for a lot of expats, but it can help. So the first thing is if you spend, money for childcare. So this doesn't really include schooling or kindergarten, but other things in addition to having childcare, right? You can essentially deduct up to 50% of the costs. So the thresholds are a lot higher this year than they were last year. You can see them on the screen. And basically, as long as both parents are working, if there's 2 parents, or if it's just you, as long as you're working or a full-time student, you can claim this child and dependent care credit. Now, I will say again why it's not always relevant to a lot of expats, because if you are filing separately, which a lot of expats are, because maybe you're married to a non-US citizen and you cannot be eligible for head of household, it's not really eligible for you to claim this credit. So just keep that in mind. And one thing to note is this credit is actually refundable for 2021. But again, not really for most expats. It's only refundable if you lived in the US for more than half the year. But I'll get to that because that's the big change for 2021 is essentially this question that you will see on, Schedule 8812, Form 2441, which is the Child and Dependent Care Credit, is did you have a main home in the US for more than half of 2021? This question seems straightforward, but it's actually not because, again, it's the IRS. Nothing's as straightforward. You have to read the fine print. So I'll break it down for you. The IRS defines having a main home in the US is essentially that the place where you would normally be domiciled. So what you consider your main home, right? The place you're going to go back to, the place where, you send your mail to, the place where your bank is at, where you would go to the dentist, where your friends and family are at. That is essentially your main home and where you're domiciled and where you would regularly live. Now, again, it doesn't have to be the same location, right? But essentially, if you would say that you would regularly live in the US, and the more important part is if you're temporary away, so if you're an expat, and the reason that you're abroad is for a temporary reason, such as illness, education, business, which is I know is a big one, or vacation, you're generally treated as still living in your main home, which can be in the US. So I say all that because if you're out there and you're on a short-term contract, say it's for 3 months, 6 months working abroad, right? Very short term, you don't consider that you're going to be an expat for the long run. You do consider your main home is still in the US, you're still going to return there. You bought essentially a round trip ticket. You can still say that your main home was in the US for more than half of 2021, even if you were physically not in the US for more than half of 2021. So that's why it's really important, because obviously if you say yes to this, then you're going to get a lot higher refunds. Now, a little shout out to all the US military personnel out there. If you're stationed outside the US, you can still say that your main home is in the US because, again, it's a temporary reason that you're abroad. Now, if you have a main home in the US for the majority of 2021, the refundable amount of the child tax credit is the full child tax credit. It's $3,600 per child under the age of 6. $3,000 per child between ages 6 and 17, because again, under 18, right? And otherwise, if you did not have a main home in the US for the majority of 2021, then your refundable amount is $1,400 per child under the age of 18, which is still quite a lot of money, especially when you don't live in the US, you probably don't have any US income or pay any US tax. Now comes to kind of, I would say, the dark side of all of this, because unfortunately in this year, there is a not so pleasant side, right? Depending on how you look at it. So the IRS did pay out advanced child tax credit payments. I know this because I also got them. So essentially, we all got stimulus payments, right? If you also got additional amounts outside of the stimulus payments and you're wondering why the IRS is just depositing money in your account, well, there's always a reason, and it's most likely the advanced child tax credit payment. So if you claimed children on your tax return in 2020, you had a US address on your Form 1040, you probably got advanced child tax credit payments. So it would have occurred between July to December 2021. The IRS would have paid you these amounts, and they should have sent you a letter 6419 to summarize how much you got. Now, I know mail gets lost, especially when you're overseas or if you're sending mail to the US and you haven't been able to check it. So if you suspect that you got this, in MyExpatTaxes, when we kind of ask you if you got any of these amounts, we will list out different ways for you to check. So there is a phone number you can call to check. There is a website that you can check as well. But ideally, you should have gotten letter 6419, and that will summarize exactly what information you have to transfer to your 2021 tax return to reconcile everything. Because if the IRS paid you too much, you have to pay it back. And you have to pay it back by April 18, 2022. So practical story here, my own situation. Like I said, I just became a parent, right? Haven't had that much sleep, but I just became a parent. And essentially the IRS gave me advanced child tax credit payments. So they gave me 2 payments of $900. So that totaled $1,800 US. Now I only have one child, and I will be able to claim her, and I'll be able to get the refundable child tax credit, but only up to $1,400. So obviously the IRS paid me $400 too much. I do have to pay them back. So unlike the stimulus payments, if you got excess amounts, you do have to pay it back. So definitely, if you think you fall in this situation, I highly recommend you at least model your return on MyExpatTaxes. You'll see right away if you owe or if you don't owe, even before pay, just so you're prepared. Because it is very important that if you got these payments, you do pay them back, because if you don't pay it back, then you will have interest on that and possibly late filing fees and late payment fees. So very important, right? And again, if you look at the glass as half full versus half empty, you still got money from the IRS, but maybe you just got too much, so you have to give it back. So, but you still got money in the end. So, don't be too scared about having to pay them tax. But all right, that is kind of everything about child tax credits, claiming your child, the dark side of the advanced child tax credits if you have to pay it back. Now let's talk a little bit more about your tax return in general. So again, if you get a tax return from us, it's probably like 50 plus pages, and you're shifting through it like, what is the relevant information I need? And I do apologize in advance, but the IRS makes us add all of these additional statements, and there's so many background calculations that are required, hence the 50 plus pages. But the most important relevant information for you are these forms. It's 1040 and all of the additional schedules attached, which essentially shows you a big overview of what your income, your deductions, your tax, and your refund. If you're used to filing and used to the forms, I will warn you that Schedule 1 through Schedule 3 got really blown up this year, and I think each of them doubled in size because there's a lot more lines on it. Don't be scared. It all still says the same thing. Now, if you're already claiming the child tax credit or the additional child tax credit, you'll probably see Schedule 8812. That is how you claim this credit. And then now we get into the expat tax benefits. If you're used to claiming the foreign earned income exclusion, you will see Form 2555 in your tax return. I put it in red because we'll get into what the foreign earned income exclusion does to your tax return and how it may actually be harming your refund. But instead of the 2555, you can also use foreign tax credit, which is very common, and that's Form 1116. Keep in mind, 1116 is kind of crazy because there's a lot of different buckets, and I'll get into that. But That form can have multiple versions, and one for regular tax, one for alternative minimum tax, aka AMT. So it is a lot of paperwork if you see it, but essentially all that's doing is helping you claim whatever foreign income taxes you pay abroad as a credit on your US tax return. And, if you're getting other types of payments, so say, obviously in your local country, you also get some type of child, benefit from the government, you're probably going to see Form 8833 in your return because you're going to be claiming a tax-free benefit. So again, if you're getting some type of paternity benefits, some type of child benefits from the government in your local country, you'll probably be able to claim a tax-free because it's government funded, which makes it fall more into Social Security, where most countries will actually allow you to exempt Social Security payments from your local country, from US taxation completely. And then obviously, because it's never complete, you also will probably have an FBAR, right, for all your foreign financial accounts. And if you actually have a lot of money in your FBARs, you'll probably see Form 8938 also in your return. So foreign earned income exclusion, and what is its effect? How does it really affect your tax return? So the first thing is the foreign earned income exclusion. What it does is it excludes about 100K, right? I mean, that amount's always increasing. And if you have housing expenses, it can be a lot more than 100K actually. But essentially it excludes about 100K of foreign source earned income from US taxation. And this results in a lower adjusted gross income, AIG, which I do highlight. If you were trying to claim the stimulus payments, using foreign earned income exclusion could have helped you claim those. So again, not really in scope for this topic, but I want to call it out because there's actually so much strategy involved in filing a US expat tax return, which is kind of crazy because you think you're just filing this honestly useless return. You don't even live in the country, but there's a lot of strategy involved. So if you were a high earner, say, you're a single filer and you're earning about 100,000 US dollars abroad, you would have been over the threshold of, getting the stimulus payments because that was capped at 75,000 US dollars for single filers. However, if you use the foreign earned income exclusion, that would have essentially eliminated 100,000 US dollars from your tax return, which would have made you have a lower adjusted gross income, making you eligible to claim the stimulus payments. So that is something that can help you, the foreign earned income exclusion. But let's continue on. What we actually get with the foreign earned income exclusion is one, it's not a required tax form. So a lot of times you'll read on the internet, it's like the number one tax form. You have to claim this tax benefit. It's the only one to claim. That's not true. It's not a required form for US expats. And what it does is if you have children, it actually makes you ineligible for the refundable child tax credits. So that is something to weigh. The refundable child tax credit is an ongoing refund you get every single year. Stimulus payments happened only on your 2020 and your 2021 tax return. So what helps you better? Does it make sense to claim the foreign income exclusion? Does it not? Now, going from there, if you're not a high earner and you live in a country where you pay high income taxes, it's pretty obvious. Just go with the foreign tax credit. Forgo foreign earned income exclusion completely because it's going to make you ineligible for the refundable child tax credits. And when you use the foreign tax credit approach, it can be more beneficial because it helps you accumulate foreign tax credit carryovers for up to 10 years. And it also makes it easier for you to contribute to your US IRA if you still want to contribute to one because you have taxable compensation. And it allows you to try to claim the refundable child tax credits if you're eligible. So again, a lot of strategy. If you see Form 2555 in your tax return and you're wondering, okay, she's talking about child tax credit refunds, I've never gotten a refund. That's probably why, because of this form. But you can always change your tax return. You can always amend it. So with that being said, I will get kind of towards the end. So that's everything about the foreign earned income exclusion. Again, if you think you were eligible for child tax credits and you see 2555 in your return, feel free to send, MyExpatTaxes an email and just ask, hey, can someone look at my return and see if I could have done something different for a refund? We're happy to take a look for free. Now, regardless, let's look at your child and what do they have to report. So I think the first thing that happens a little bit more common before they actually have to file a tax return is if they have to file an FBAR. So you're used to probably filing an FBAR, right? Because if you have a combined maximum balance in all your foreign financial accounts over 10,000 US dollars, you're filing an FBAR. But if your child also has that, right? Because you open up financial accounts for your child because you're saving for your child's future. If their combined maximum balance is also over $10,000, even if you report all of those accounts on your own FBAR, they also need to file their own FBAR. I'll repeat that. They do need to file their very own FBAR. And this is in addition to you reporting any of your children's accounts that your name is on your own FBAR. So just keep in mind, everyone has their own FBAR requirements, regardless of your age. Now, if your child has income, this can be a little bit trickier, especially if they have unearned income. So if they have unearned income over $1,100, you're going to have to report that income. And it's either you're going to report it on your own tax return via Form 8814, or they're going to file their own tax return. It really depends on the situation, and this gets a little bit trickier, but essentially if they have unearned income, so investment income, passive income, some type of income that's not salary compensation, and it's over $1,100, they might have to file their own tax return, or at least include their income on your tax return. Now, if they just have total gross income, so including earned income, unearned income, if they're over the filing threshold, which is $12,550 for single filers, assuming your child's not married or having a different filing status, they just need to file their own return in general, right? So, they're completely on their own. And I think this is important because a lot of people ask me, what age does my child have to start filing tax returns? It's not about age. It's about, one, how much is in their foreign financial accounts that their name is on. Two, how much money do they earn? How much income is attached to their name? Because the IRS is not concerned about age. They're concerned about how much assets do you have? And how much income do you have? And if I say that and you're worried and you're freaking out because maybe your child needed to file FBARs or something, please don't freak out. There are always solutions, right? So the first thing is, I think the FBAR is probably the most common part that parents may overlook. There is a delinquent FBAR submission process if needed. If your child didn't need to file a tax return, but they need to file FBARs, there is a process called the delinquent FBAR submission. And essentially they would backfile 6 years of FBARs, and then their slate would be wiped clean. I mean, I think a child probably doesn't have more than 6 back years of FBARs anyways, but essentially you can file it, you can go under this delinquent filing submission process. And then that essentially means, okay, you know what? Yeah, you're late, but you made up for it, and the IRS won't go around and try to charge you any penalty for not filing an FBAR later on. Now, that was a lot. Let's go into the actual tax filing deadline. So if you see that and you go, okay, we all have to file tax returns, etc. What are the actual deadlines? So I hinted to this, but this year it's April 18th because the 15th falls on a holiday. It's on Good Friday in the US. So the 18th is the actual, 15th this year. So April 18th is the date for payment. So again, if you think you owe back the advanced child tax credit payments, you should file by this date, right? You should at least make an extension payment by this date. Now, if you don't owe taxes, it's still June 15th. You're an expat. You don't have to file till June 15th. All fine, right? You do have to pay taxes by April 18th, but you don't have to file until June 15th. And of course, by June 15th, you can always file an extension, so Form 4868, and that gives you until October 17th. So that is a form that you can either file through MyExpatTaxes. You can also print out Form 4868. You can pay $1 to irs.gov/payments as an extension payment, right? Any of those will do it to get you a filing extension to October 17th, 2021. So you have time to collect your documents, time to get a social security number for your child. And of course, if you have to file back taxes, you should do that as soon as possible. And then I close with, if you haven't filed, if your child needs to file and they never filed, like the delinquent FBAR submission process, if you actually had to file income tax returns as well, there is the streamlined procedure. So this is 3 back years of taxes, so 2018 to 2020, and then you'd also do your current year of 2021, 6 back years of FBARs, 2014 to 2020, plus your current FBAR. And even if you haven't filed for more than 10 years, 20 years, whatever, it doesn't matter. You just need 3 back years. And if you never claimed additional child tax credits, if you never claimed the stimulus payments, if you go through the streamlined procedure, you will be so pleasantly surprised because you'll probably be getting thousands of refunds every year, and you can still claim the 2018 refunds. You can still claim 2019's refunds, 2020. And that also means if you've been filing your tax return and you don't think you've been filing it in the most optimal way, you can still amend 2018, 2019, and 2020 to claim any missing refunds. I do warn you that the IRS only honors refunds up to three years past the filing deadline. So that means for October 18th, if you want that 2018 refund, you need to file that and get it to the IRS by June 15th, 2022. But I would actually caution to try to do it by April, because we do have to fight with the IRS sometimes to explain to them that you're an expat. So your deadline would have been June 15th, and you just don't want to be in that situation where you have to call the IRS and tell them that, right? So I say be safe and try to get your 2018 return in before April 18th of this year. So basically, back years, they have to be paper mailed, right? If you're doing the streamlined procedure, so do expect there's a delay in processing, but you can always e-file your 2021 tax return to get any, your third stimulus payment, any child tax credits as soon as possible. And just be warned, if you do your taxes yourself, if you use a US-based tax software, a lot of chances you won't be able to e-file, because one, say you're married filing separately, your spouse doesn't have a social security number, et cetera, et cetera. So just make sure that you can e-file 2021 to make everything process as soon as possible. Of course, MyExpatTaxes will allow you to e-file, because we knew that was a huge problem. And so we went to solve it. And if you need to streamline, we do have a streamlining package for quite a reasonable price compared to what others would charge. And I leave it there. I hope that was good information, right? I definitely just talked a lot in the past 40 minutes, but I tried to give you the most important information there. So I will ask Migla to come back on and let's tackle your questions. I don't see that many questions in the Q&A, so keep popping them in there, and we are here to just... Thanks for watching our webinar. We hope to help you feel more confident about filing your US expat taxes. MyExpatTaxes is the leading US expat tax software and will make your filing experience a lot easier and smoother, as it should. So check us out, and if you have any questions, you can always reach us in the live chat in the app or via email at team@myexpattaxes.com. Happy filing!